Hollywood loves to slap the label historical on just about anything, but real historians just call these movies lies. A war movie so wrong the British Parliament publicly condemned it. A biopic that turned Mozart into a farting idiot tormented by a rival who barely hated him. And John Wayne, as Genghis Khan, filmed downwind of a nuclear test site. These are the historical movies so inaccurate actual historians still hate them. The Kennedy assassination is one of the biggest tragedies in U.S. history. A young president killed right there in front of his wife in the Secret Service, the whole country watching. But it's also a breeding ground for conspiracy theories. CIA, communists, the mob, you name it. And when Oliver Stone made JFK, he just stuffed every single one into one of the slickest movies you'll ever see. It's so well made, a lot of people end up thinking it's accurate, but it isn't. Stone has actually admitted it. He once said, "This isn't history, this is movie making. I'm not setting out to make a documentary." And on that level, it's a home run. Nothing about this is documentary. The story centers on Jim Garrison's 1969 trial of Clay Shaw down in New Orleans. In reality, Garrison's case fell apart. The key witness had been drugged and eventually took back his entire story. Stone didn't bother with that. He just deleted the witness and brought in Kevin Bacon to play a totally fictional version. That's only one example. There are more, but you get the point. If you like tense war movies, this one delivers. American submarine crew posing as Germans trying to snatch the Enigma code machine. Great setup, real stakes, the Nazis' encrypted messages, the Allies desperate to break the code. The problem is, pretty much everything you see is made up. What they show you is so far from accurate, the British Parliament actually issued an official rebuke. The movie is inspired by Operation Primrose, but in the real story, it was British sailors who boarded the German sub and grabbed the code books, not Americans, and definitely not in 1942 like the movie shows. By that point, the Allies already had working Enigma machines. What they needed were the codes. Plus, the real boat was sunk in 1944, never captured. So good movie, but as history goes, not even close. Roland Emmerich never lets facts get in the way of a good set piece, and this movie might be his magnum opus for just making things up. You've got people building the pyramids with woolly mammoths, using steel tools thousands of years before steel was even invented, and living in giant cities that just didn't exist. For the record, this was the era when humans were moving out of the Paleolithic and into the Neolithic. We're talking early farming, permanent settlements, stone tools, maybe a few early monuments. Writing, big architecture, advanced metalwork didn't even exist yet, not for another few thousand years. But apparently in Emmerich's world you can do all of it at once. Enemy at the Gates takes on the Battle of Stalingrad, Jude Law and Ed Harris, sniper duel, city in ruins, millions of lives at stake. One of the most famous battles of World War II, absolutely brutal stuff. Paramount actually bought the script thinking it was all true. Awkward because most of it is pure invention. Jude Law's character, Vasily Zaitsev, was real. He was a legendary Soviet sniper. But the whole idea of a Nazi rival, this dramatic sniper chess match, was made up, likely as Soviet propaganda. No real evidence for any of it. Didn't matter to the filmmakers, though. The director still calls it a true story. Gary Oldman is Churchill. Great performance, no doubt, but the movie plays pretty loose with reality. One of the biggest inaccuracies here is that Churchill gets shown as this old, broken-down outsider who suddenly swept into leadership at the start of World War II. In reality, Churchill still had influence, plenty of allies, and wasn't nearly as sidelined as the movie suggests. And then there's the famous scene where Churchill rides the London Underground, talking to regular people who inspire him to stand up to Hitler. Great drama, but pure fiction. Churchill was born into the aristocracy, famously lavish, and the idea of him hopping on the tube for a motivational chat just never happened. The film also sidesteps a lot of Churchill's flaws, his racism, his classism, and tries to boil down his leadership to one chance encounter. None of that's real. Still, it's a good watch, but don't use it as a history lesson. Here's one most people skipped. James Franco, early World War I air combat sounds great on paper. The real story behind it is somewhat fascinating. The whole production was a mess, and the historical advisor they hired turned out to be a total fraud. For starters, none of the planes are right. The Germans are flying Fokker D-1s, not really standard at the time, and the Americans are a Newport 17 that would have been out of service before those German planes ever flew. The producers said it was just to make dogfights easier to follow on screen. But the big issue here is John Livesey, their military advisor, faked his whole resume, claimed he was a war hero, served in the parachute regiment, got a medal for gallantry. Actually, he did a few years in the catering corps and made the rest up. He eventually went to jail for it. It's 1956, and Hollywood casts John Wayne as Genghis Khan. Let that sink in for a second. He's got the same delivery, same mustache, and somehow everyone else is white too. Susan Hayward as his wife, Agnes Moorehead as his mom. Hayward looks like herself. Moorehead gets some wild hats, and only Wayne is styled to even vaguely look Mongolian. But that's not the only disaster here. They shot the whole thing out in Utah, right downwind from a nuclear weapons testing site. Of 220 cast and crew, 91 developed cancer, including Wayne, Hayward, Moorehead, the director, and even some locals. There's no way to know how much the location played a part. Smoking and drinking were more common then. But Moorehead, for example, didn't do either, and the death toll kept climbing for years. If the casting didn't make this a historical crime, the health impact did. If you want to see why people love historical films and why historians sometimes hate them, just look at Elizabeth. There's Cate Blanchett, huge costumes, dramatic speeches, and plenty of poison. But the movie takes a ton of liberties with the facts. The real Marie de Guise, Queen of Scotland, is shown being assassinated by Walsingham. She actually died of illness. The Duke of Anjou, shown here as a cross-dresser, was a suitor later in Elizabeth's reign, not at this point, and it was probably his brother who was gay. Elizabeth's white face makeup shows up early, but she didn't start using it until years later after a nasty case of smallpox. William Cecil, one of her most trusted advisors, didn't get pushed out when she took the throne. He stayed for decades. Most of what's here is just compressed or moved around for drama. Becket from 1964 zooms in on King Henry II and his friend-turned-foe Thomas Becket, Archbishop of Canterbury. But the film basically erases two of the most interesting women of the Middle Ages, Henry's mother, Empress Matilda, and his wife, Eleanor of Aquitaine. Matilda was the daughter of King Henry I and widow of the Holy Roman Emperor, and she kicked off a civil war to claim her rights in England and Normandy. She was brave and smart, but her blunt personality made her unpopular in London. Even after capturing her rival, she let him go. Later, a deal was made so her son Henry could become king. Eleanor of Aquitaine was a legend in her own right. Queen of France, went on crusade, then married Henry and brought with her a huge chunk of southwestern France. She even rebelled against Henry with their sons, spent years locked up, and outlived him to help her kids rule. The film skips all that, reducing both women to the background. It's still a classic, but if you want the real story, you have to go digging.